Tenekoto katoa, tuarua ki ngā mate hare hare atura. Kia tato e tō ne kiora. Ko Hudson River te awa, ke te noho o ki Wellington. Ko Stephen Croucher, aho. So, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching throughout the world. I am Stephen Croucher, the head of School of Communication, Journalism, and Marketing here at Massey University, and the regional director for the Massey Business School Wellington campus. And it's my pleasure to be joining this event and to be joining the International Communication Association as part of a regional hub, and to be here in Aotearoa in person with people, and to be joining all of you virtually around the world. This morning we have a organizational communication panel, a research escalator, and I will be chairing the panel. We have 3 recorded presentations, and one of our presenters is actually here in the room sitting to my left as well. So we have kind of a hybrid panel today. So we will have her panel or her presentation virtually, but then we will have questions, discussion, and I will also be looking at the Zoom to see if anyone jumps in, but please also put questions on the ICA portal and people can always respond to those later. So that's a little bit of our format. We've had a couple of days of this and it's been wonderful to actually see people virtually, to see people face to face, and to have this kind of engagement. And we hope to see everyone in 2022 in Paris. So we'll go to our first presentation, which is Civil Society Organizations Advocacy Discourses on COVID-19 Contract Tracing Applications, Prolepsis in Hybrid Civil Societies Organizations, Rhetoric and Identity by Lucille Desmoulins and Armen Kachaturov from the Université Gustave Eiffel. And I will turn things over to our presenters. Thank you.
Hello, I am Lucille Desmoulins, here to present a research project on hybrid civil society organizations advocacy discourses on COVID-19 contact tracing mobile-based applications. My co-author and I are Associate Professor in Information Communication Sciences at the Gustave Eiffel University. We studied civil societies organizations influence writing contents and diffusion as regard to the COVID-19 contact tracing application implementation in France. To do so, we used CCO, ACO, and then cognitive approaches in public policies and framing theories. We also relied on many different approaches to the writing activity, all deriving from Foucault, and finally on critical approaches of political influence strategies and influence-oriented organizations. We did a qualitative discourse analysis of all intermediary bodies' outputs on COVID app from the first mention of it to December 2020. We also did a national and regional press content analysis from the first mention of the project to implement a Stop COVID app in the press, the 19th of April 2020, to the announcement 7 months later of the release of a new enriched and renamed version of the application. As you may not be familiar with French COVID-19 public policies, so let's say they have lacked purpose and consistency from the beginning of the crisis. As far as the app is concerned, it was also chaotic. The French government considered that such an app was worth looking at because digital apps are fashionable and this one could give cause for hope as it worked in Korea. Yet, beginning of April, 2 articles in 2 main French newspapers quoted the president with the usual entourage code. This is politically and philosophically slippery ground. This meant that the policy space to implement this app was very small, and that President Macron and his government were well aware of it. The French public indeed expresses strong distrust toward state centrally managed personal data systems, and France is one of the few countries with no state-issued electronic identity card. Several dividing lines structure the debate as regard to the contact tracing mobile app, and intermediary bodies voiced all those lines loud and clear in their reports, position papers, press releases, tweets, etc. There were many dividing lines, but every voices questioned the balance between medical usefulness and privacy implication. And all voices also expressed huge doubts about the app acceptability and efficiency. There was no debate. Even the government official and advisory bodies and scientific counseling institutions say so. The business actors even said, "We have doubts, but we will make it for free." The project went on in spite of the civil society organizations' advocacy against it. They debated in between each other, mostly on disintermediated platforms, but they failed to be nationwide heard. Why? French civil society organizations that intend to influence the political decision-making process are named intermediary bodies. Due to Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract theory, they are perceived as dubious, and they suffer from a lack of legitimacy in the eyes of the French public policy decision-makers. As a result, they often euphemize the prospective dimension of their discourse, and they often rhetorically enhance its acceptability and authority. In gray, you have a quotation by President Macron, and this was the same week as the first press leaks on the app project. I summarize it. Intermediary bodies aren't responsible towards the public, and they cannot be trusted. They don't want to do the hard work. Yet, intermediary bodies, president, directors, or spokespersons play a key role for democracy because they promote or recycle ideas and the debate. The digital 2.0 era has created many new opportunities for the dissemination of an increasingly wide range of outputs. Yet, most organizations' influence strategies still rely on traditional mass media to get the public and the decision-makers' attention and to frame the perception and ideas. Intermediary bodies' leaders are very often required to express their viewpoints by journalists who would quote them in their papers. But this did not happen on the Stop COVID app. Why? We have two main results. First, we validated our first hypothesis. There was indeed an intense production of outputs by intermediary bodies, which reflects their legitimization efforts and the writing activities organizing dynamics. All reports, pamphlet, position papers, press release, graphics, tweets covered all dividing lines: health, digital technology, economy, philosophy, etc. They nearly all advocated against the app implementation. If hybrid civil societies organizations are willing to take part in the framing of a discourse on contact tracing smartphone-based apps, that's part of their influence strategy, but it's also part of their identity affirmation. We also reached an unexpected inductive result. Intermediate bodies' outputs were hardly quoted in the press, and their representative hardly ever interviewed. Hence, a late hypothesis we called prolepsis hypothesis. In rhetoric, prolepsis means that a writer or speaker anticipates explicitly or implicitly the counter-argument of his opponents. He raises himself the counter-arguments and answers it, which neutralize his opponents. In our case, the poor access of all intermediary bodies to the mass media echo chamber could be the consequence of the government's strategy to occupy the media stage and use prolepsis in its rhetoric. Usually, this government never hesitates. It never says it is wrong. On the contact tracing apps, journalists quoted government representatives who expressed their concerns and doubts, leaving the civil society debates behind. The government was both the project holder and its main critiques. This prolepsis did not manage to silence civil society, but it managed to prevent intermediary bodies' leaders from accessing to their usual mass media echo chambers. So now to test this hypothesis, we need to do more interviews with journalists and intermediary bodies representatives. This research is at its early beginning, so we hope to hear or read many comments and advices from you. Bye-bye, guys.
Well,
Hi
thank you.
there. My name is Noon Abdul Qadir, and I'm a PhD.
I said, well, thank you very much for that. Our second presentation is Bias in Candidate Sourcing, investigating stereotypical gender and age-related frames of online job advertisements by Noon Abdul Qadir from the University of Amsterdam.
Hi there. My name is Noon Abdul Qadir, and I'm a PhD at the University of Amsterdam. Today I'm presenting my first-year paper topic titled Bias in Candidate Sourcing. We are specifically investigating the stereotypical gender and age-related frames of online job advertisements. Active candidate sourcing is the phase of the hiring and recruitment process where employers seek out candidates. It is the earliest stage of the HR process, and it provides ample opportunity to investigate bias propagation in the process as a whole. Active candidate sourcing begins when employers craft and post job advertisements. These job advertisements not only represent the first formal communication an employee or a job seeker receives from an organization, they also tell us about many elements. Firstly, they're informed by and inform us about the organizational values. Secondly, they tell us who is envisioned as the ideal candidate by an employer. Lastly, they tell us about the level of diversity or lack thereof in a given job domain. Given that job ads are as informative as they are, it becomes necessary to look beyond the manifest elements. Framing theory provides us a good opportunity to look into latent meanings that may be present in job ads. A text is said to be framed if it emphasizes a certain aspect of reality over others. This is done via the strategic use of framing devices and convey latent meaning called reasoning devices. Stereotypes are a form of framing devices that are culturally embedded, meaning the stereotypes are culturally agreed upon and propagated. Particular to our study is the social categorization framing. This type of framing centers around ownership of cultural objects. These are things like social roles or jobs. The reasoning device that follows this frame is that some groups are outgroups, and these groups are not qualified for ownership of cultural objects. Outgroups may disqualify in-groups based on the stereotype content of those social categories. To understand these stereotypes, we can turn to the stereotype content model. This model was developed to understand universal intergroup dynamics. When an individual encounters an outgroup member, they ask themselves two questions. Do they want to harm me, and can they harm me? Based on these two questions, Fisk and colleagues posited two dimensions along which people stereotype others. The first dimension is communion. It relates to the degree of perceived warmth in others and outgroup members. Traits associated with communion include friendliness, supportiveness, and kindness. The second dimension is agency. and it relates to the degree of perceived competency in strangers or outgroup members. Traits associated with competency include competitiveness, leadership qualities, and independence. Empirical studies show that females and elderly people are perceived to be high in communion, but low in agency, whereas males and young people are perceived to be high in agency and low in communion. These stereotypes may manifest in communication that relates to the stereotyped group due to the stereotype consistency bias. According to this bias, stereotype consistent information tends to be communicated more often and more prominently. Taken together, we can form the two following hypotheses. Firstly, that job advertisements from male-dominated occupations will contain more competence-related frames compared to job advertisements from female-dominated occupations or mixed-gender occupations. Secondly, we can expect that job advertisements from occupations that fit the profile of older job candidates will contain more warmth-related frames compared to job advertisements from occupations that fit the profile of younger job candidates or mixed-age occupations. To test these two hypotheses, we conducted an automated supervised content analysis. We collected English language job ads from 3 online job search platforms, namely LinkedIn, Indeed, and Glassdoor. We constructed a codebook based on the presence or absence of warmth and competency-related terms in the text. Coding instructions regarding how to identify warmth and competence were derived from the results of a systematic literature review supplemented with a word embedding analysis. The resulting annotated data was then used to create an ensemble classifier. Preliminary results show support for both hypotheses. Thank you for listening, and if you have any further questions, you can contact me at the information provided on the screen.
Thank you, Noon. Our third presentation is the impact of WeChat use on organizational dissent. And we are applying uses and gratification theory in this case. And our presentation is by Melissa Wei Chen, and it also includes Siako Rahmani and Cheng Zheng.
Hi everyone, I'm Melissa. I'm here to present a study on the effect of WeChat use on dissent, applying uses and gratification theory to understand dissent. My presentation will be given in 5 parts. The first part is introduction to my research. The second part is introducing the 2 concepts. In the third part, I'll describe the data collection and analyze. In the last section, I discuss the main findings. First, let's begin with the research background. Social media dissemination worldwide is increasing. China is one of the biggest global media markets. WeChat, created in 2011, has been integrated into people's daily lives. It is key to access whether employees can communicate effectively and appropriately using social media. Organizational dissent research has investigated face-to-face dissent, but employee dissent via social media is less known. Dissent as a face-threatening act, the effect of WeChat use on dissent, and linked dissent to face concerns at an individual level are understudied. Therefore, this study develops the existing knowledge of dissent and face concerns by aiding social media. Now I'm introducing the 2 concepts. Organizational dissent are employee expressing disagreement or contradictory opinions about organizational practices, policies, and operations. Articulate dissent is expression of disagreement over organizational policies, operations, and practices to the management. Dissent is risky in terms of economic and personal harm. Face is defined as the positive image or social value someone claims for themselves in social interactions. 3 kinds of face concerns are classified: self-face, concern for one's image; other face, concern for another's image; and mutual face, concern for both parties' image or the image of the relationship. As the dissent nature is confrontational, expressing dissent is putting interpersonal relationship and face in conflicts. Employees' face concerns may influence dissent tendency and the channels to express it. After introducing the key terms, now we are moving to the method. Based on the collections between the 3 constructs, a model was proposed. Participants were 310 employees of various Chinese organizations. 166 females, 144 males were recruited via a Chinese online survey platform called 智多星. They were asked to fill 3 self-report Likert scales to measure their weighted use intensity, organizational dissent, and face concerns. 4 open-ended questions were also included, asking their motivation and concerns in expressing dissent in different channels. Correlations were calculated, and maximum likelihood SEM was performed. I'm showing you the quantitative results in the next 4 slides. Weighted use intensity was entered as an exogenous factor. The 3 face concerns are endogenous mediators, articulate dissent as dependent variables. The model didn't meet the minimal threshold. Let's look at the findings from the open-ended questions in the next 4 slides. Each slide listed the top 2 things identified in each question. Chinese employees chose to express their dissent either face-to-face or online because of the convenience and accuracy of their communication. Their motivation in dissent was to change the circumstances causing dissatisfaction and express themselves. Negative impression and self-assurance were the primary hesitations they had. Moreover, the main worries in expressing disagreements were negative impressions and organizational retaliation. The quantitative analysis indicated that the authority or fear of punishment could be the external factor overdrive personal motivations in weighted consumption. Therefore, this study contributed to advocating future studies, consider measuring media from political communication. Moreover, it is one of the few studies in operationalizing face concerns into uses and gratification theory and organizational dissent. From the semantic analysis, the current study contributed 3 ways. First, it reflected Chinese employees had positive perceptions of engaging in constructive communication. Second, this study indicated that face concerns were a better explanatory mechanism in dissent than sense-making. Third and last, it is one of the few studies that used mixed methods in dissent, revealing the cultural understanding of it. I look forward to reading your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa, Diaco, and Chen. So what we'd like to do now is open the floor for questions, and I looked and there are no questions currently on Zoom, but questions from our group here in Aotearoa. We are currently, for those of you who are watching now or will be watching, in Palmerston North on one of Massey University's 3 campuses. So I'll open it up for discussion or questions here before I jump in with some thoughts. I'll open it up for those here first. Or comments.
Elena. I have a question. Sorry. I have a question to Melissa because she's here and we can ask questions. I understand that it was supposed to be a very short presentation, but could you give a little bit more detail about the qualitative part? Like, what did you do? What was the data set and how did you do that?
Oh, thank you, Elena, for your inquiry. For the method I used to survey, there are three scales used to measure the constructs and also the four open questions. And 310 participants there. So the answer is the four open questions in Chinese. So I translated all of them. And I use a semantic analysis to see the recurring things people reported there. So I identified the things and to see the frequencies there and to see the and also during my analysis, I repeatedly like to combine some similar things or like repeatedly to make the things more not overlapped and also to present the whole data.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
And keep in mind, if we don't have someone here, we can also have comments or potential questions that our other two panelists could see later when they hopefully see this Zoom, so we could pose potential questions for them to see at a later date as well. So just want to put that out there. Any other? I have a few thoughts. I want to see if there's anyone else has any things. I guess I'll just say one thing is it was interesting, just I think when it comes to the first paper, to see the idea of the privacy concerns. And what I'm wondering is, as we look here, besides here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is not just the privacy concerns with the apps and COVID response, but it was really interesting what Emmanuel Macron said. Basically, it's not a failure, it just didn't work. This rhetorical framing is, we've had the same thing happen here in New Zealand recently with our COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins, who we were told in New Zealand that we would have vaccinations for group 4, which is basically anyone under the age of 65 who doesn't have a health condition. So basically the bulk of the population could get vaccinated starting July 1st. We were told we were told July, and everyone assumed that meant beginning of July, we'd have Pfizer available. But recently we were told, here that, no, actually the very end of July, probably. So our press has been going after the government saying, wait a minute, did you lie? Did you screw up? Did you mess up? And they're like, no, there was no error. There was no problem. It's just a change. It's still July, whether it's July 1st or July 31st, it's still July. And so it is this political framing, this political, rhetorically shaping things. And we see this throughout the world when it comes to COVID and our health responses. Is our health ministers, our government ministers, our presidents, our prime ministers, our dictators, whoever, are rhetorically shaping our health messages now to really respond to things to make them look the way makes them look better. Yeah. So this makes perfect sense that, Macron would say it's not a failure, it just didn't work because it makes him look better. And maybe it wasn't a failure, but you have to look at what is, maybe I'll turn to some other people in the room, is what is the difference, if I may, organizationally? So this was an interesting, your research panel on organizational communication, 3 very different papers, which is nice. Part of what I like about the OrgComm division and the Escalators is that you have not all on the same topic. You have different aspects of organizational comm, intercultural, that does the same thing, so it is instructional. Is they all deal with issues really of how we understand theory, how we understand a method. But if we look to this idea of failure, well, what is a failure in an organization? I guess that's a key question for us. What is a failure? How do you define a failure in an organization? I guess I'll put that out there for people to talk about. How do you define a failure? How do you define failure in an organization?
I suppose the first thought is it's something that didn't work. But then if you look at what Macron said, it's just like, well, it wasn't a failure, it just didn't work. It's like, well, are they the same or are they different? And is it about face saving as well? Just to take Melissa's sort of concept, how many governments actually say, well, we messed up? You don't actually have that. It is about like trying to protect yourself. And by saying something like that, it's like, okay, quite a philosophical concept. But what does it actually mean? Hey, yeah,
And who defines failure?
yeah, yeah,
I guess this thing, in this case, Macron is defining it as it just didn't work.
yeah.
And so he's really set up a dichotomy almost. And not even almost not a dichotomy, a triumvirate, really.
Yes,
or
yes.
triumvirate, sorry, of like success, failure, didn't work.
Yes. We've got two options, two negative options.
Two negative options in some ways. So I
Yeah.
think that's one interesting thing I'd say for the first paper is really looking at, and when I read the paper, one of the things I'd recommend, one of the things I do, sorry, when I respond to panels, I also make recommendations as if I'm doing like a journal review, is to be really interesting from a cognitive approach is to also look at really this approach of really who decides what is failure and who decides what is success and what does and doesn't work, is to go into that kind of discussion, because that really makes it a very clear delineation, I think, cognitively and affectively.
Yeah,
Because it's happening everywhere. I mean, look to Trump. Trump basically said, we're winning. Well,
what does that mean?
what does that mean? And in whose mind are we winning? I mean, clearly in his mind we were winning, but maybe there's so much going on in that mind. But we're winning. In Biden's mind, we're the U.S. is successful. Other people would say we're not in the U.S. or in New Zealand. So it's all in the eye of the beholder.
And I suppose in an organization, do people challenge failures? Or is it just something that you try and sort of, it's almost like, what's that theory? I can't remember the name, where you try and the strengths, you highlight the strengths and you sort of try and hide your weaknesses. And I suppose this is the case where we made a terrible mess there, but let's try and not to emphasize it too much, we'll move on. Whereas if it's something that's really positive, we sort of spend a lot of time on that. But nobody really challenges, I don't know. Hey.
Well, the challenging would be dissent.
A dissent, yeah, exactly. And how often does that actually happen, directly or, and again, linking really nicely to your by WhatsApp, what's a WeChat, that's, very interesting.
Yeah, I feel this is a very interesting topic, but just still need more further work to to know more information about this area.
What other thoughts, folks?
I was thinking regarding the failure of the app. The idea was like, it wasn't a failure in terms of its technological progress,
Yes.
right? So what they wanted to achieve, they did achieve, and that's why they don't want to go into modification strategy. We messed up because the idea, well, it's not a failure. It's working in terms of how we wanted it to work, but for some reason people didn't like it. So if people didn't like it, it effectively didn't work, but for which reasons and who is to blame? So it's like, shifting the responsibility onto the public and saying, we didn't mess up, you just don't like us, or don't like the app.
Which brings in the idea of blame attribution, which is another really interesting, theoretical construct, which could go really well into the first paper, I think, is the idea of really when something doesn't work is really who do we blame? Why do we blame? And this also goes into, I think, we look to stereotyping, the second paper, is this issue of when we blame, generally we blame an outgroup. And so this is very common for us to do. And we blame the group that's weaker than us. And it's happening quite a bit now with COVID-19. And so it's one of those things where it's just so common now. And even with dissent is the idea of blame is when we dissent, we're generally voicing concern about something. So we're almost placing blame on something. So there's a lot of interesting research in blame attribution, which could be brought even more to the forefront in organizational communication research. And I will say, I really like that in the second paper, bringing in Fisk's work, which you don't see very often actually in OrCom, which was kind of nice to see. And so I really like that interdisciplinary bringing work that's more outside of the norm of COM, which is kind of cool to see.
I'd like to give an example of organizational failure or government failure in case of COVID-19 vaccine. In Bangladesh at first contacted with India Serum Institute to export vaccine, AstraZeneca vaccine. Accordingly, first slot, some came according to the contract, but when the COVID-19 scenario worsened in India, they stopped the export to Bangladesh. And what happened? Some people get the first dose, but at the Indian government stopped the vaccine export, they are not now getting the second dose. And even the people do not know when they will be able to get the second dose. And people cannot blame anyone because it's not also the government failure. Because Indian government, the scenario is so much worse in India, so they are just stopping to export it to the other countries, and they are just providing the vaccine to their citizens, and it's normal. But we are facing the problem, the citizens of Bangladesh, they are not getting the second dose.
Good point. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I guess I wanted just to comment on the second paper, because I really like that research looking at the stereotype in the bias in candidate choices in job applications, because those qualities emphasized for particular job positions and occupations can be actually used to discriminate people of a different gender or age or other sort of characteristics if they don't fit into that stereotype formulated in the job description. And like the first thing I was thinking, like the first occupation was IT professionals, because IT professionals commonly are stereotyped as male and quite young. So it's obviously that the job description, the writing of the job description will be stereotyped to this particular person, male and young.
It's interesting, if you look to some countries, I know there's been experiences with some French corporations where they've had it so when people apply, they can't, there's no name, there's no demographic information, it's just basically a number. And what they found is that generally that when that happens, people who are not white male tend to get further along. There's also been studies showing that generally people who have a non-Christian sounding name, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but generally a non-Western sounding name typically are less likely to make it through first passes with many corporations. And so that's why some will change, or use a different name for applications. They're more likely to get through the first round and then may not get to the next round. And so more work, particularly in business and in HR, is showing that some companies are trying to address this when it comes to that first stage. But that's not in the ad itself, but that's in the interview process.
The next stage.
And that's in that stage. I think when it comes to the ads, I can say here at Massey, one of the things that we do is that we're working closely with our human resource department really on like the academic ads, whether they be academic or even professionals. So like our professional staff to really make sure that the ads are not formulaic, but that they're really vetted so that they're like, these are the things we need. And that they're things that can be done by, it doesn't matter if you're male, female, white, black, purple, orange, anything. If you have my color hair, purple hair, it doesn't really matter. But I think that's the key thing, is that they're skills that are needed. I think that's the key thing that we really are looking for. And I think that's important that organizations reevaluate that and that they look at their ads.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a very important research that needs to be published and publicized across HR departments, because they may not notice that their formulations in job applications, advertisements, actually are stereotypically constructed towards particular characteristic, particular groups of people.
I agree. And there's so much in this area. If you look to, one of the things I really appreciate about where we're at is, being in a college of business, is there's a lot of overlap with people in other areas, like in School of Management, and other econ and finance, and also in marketing. but we see, you know, we draw on other fields quite a bit, I think, here in CJM in our school. And I really do appreciate, that, you know, drawing on other theories and other methods. But there's quite a bit now also in the human resource management area looking at this issue of, you know, stereotyping, prejudice in hiring practices, and also in like tenure and promotion. And there's more and more discussion of that even at ICA and NCA. And so there is this dialogue, but Elena, you're exactly right. This kind of stuff needs to happen even further to look to our organizational structures and, you know, systematic racism and prejudice and so on. Priest, do we have anything on, nothing on Zoom, anything on Facebook for us to, I don't see anything on Zoom.
No comments yet. No.
So any final comments from our group here in Aotearoa before I maybe make a final closing comment as chair? I'll take that prerogative. No one minds. And then we'll finish a little early, I guess then. Okay, well, I guess what I'll close with is what I think these three presentations show us, and I would encourage anyone watching to please reach out to these researchers, is these teams really do show the diverse aspects of organizational communication. I know one of the teams personally. Melissa's, I'll have to say, one of my doctoral students, so I know the work that she's doing. But all three of them show just the diverse aspect, the diversity of organizational communication. I mean, really, you have work on, you know, framing and more of looking at the rhetoric, the cognitive sides of framing in the COVID world in our first paper. And that's really just one aspect, which is really in depth. You have issues that Foucault brought in. So you really show a lot of diversity in our first paper, bringing in a whole lot. The second paper looking really to bringing in research from, say, HR, from management, from stereotypes, from psychology, organizational communication. So quite in depth and quite diverse, which is what I like about OrgComm. It's really interconnected. I really like that field quite a bit. And the third, we have organizational dissent, which is an area that I've written in quite a bit. I really enjoy the idea of expressing yourself, expressing disagreement and opinions, but bringing that into also media and our idea of face and how we present ourselves, and exploring that in a new cultural context. And really looking at the intersections between our, you know, social networking site use and so on. So these three papers really show, as I said before, the, you know, the depth of organizational communication. And there's a whole lot of other panels. If you go to the ICA website and you go to the conference and you log on, you'll see there's so many sessions you can watch that have a lot. One of the things I did last night when there was nothing on television is instead of watching Netflix again, which I could watch all the time, or Disney Plus, is I went on and I looked at some of the divisions and looked at some of the presentations, and there was quite a bit of really cool stuff. So OrgComm division, yeah, has a lot of really cool presentations this year. So I would encourage you to take a look, enjoy those. And I want to thank all of you who hopefully will watch this later. So all the best, please stay safe and enjoy the rest of the ICA. And we hope to see you all in person next year. Thanks.